Hey guys, I'm Chris.
Hey everybody, I'm Robert.
And we are the Film Flamers.
And we are here with a very important episode. As you know, in May, we like to discuss the May 24 of it all, right? Those very important, elevated, prestige horror movies.
The ones that at least are reminiscent and nostalgic of that A24 feeling.
That's right. This May 24, we're doing non-A24 movies for y'all.
Because we're scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Because A24 has only produced so many things.
And we've covered a lot of them, actually. And a lot of them have been polls, and we want to save some of those for continuing polls and for deep dives and such. So this year, though, we really wanted to talk about something that was really kicked off a movement, or was part of a kickoff of a movement. And we're going to dive deep into that, right? And so we're discussing, essentially, the Babadook and the Baba birth of the modern prestige horror movement.
Baba birth? The Babadook is a 2014 Australian psychological horror film written and directed by Jennifer Kent, expanding on her 2005 short Monster in her feature debut. Starring Essie Davis and Noah Wiseman, it follows a widowed mother and her increasingly unhinged son as they confront a mysterious top-hatted entity that may, or may not, be grief in a trench coat. The haunting score is by Jed Kurzel.
That same year, the Babadook clawed its way out of Australia and into our collective nightmares, ushering in a new wave of horror that traded jump scares for emotional devastation and dread you could wallpaper your house with. In some cases, literally. This week, we dig into Jennifer Kent's unforgettable debut, a story of motherhood, madness, and the horror of trying to stay sane when your kid is one tantrum away from needing a priest.
Here. We'll unpack its legacy, its role in launching the so-called elevated horror movement, and why 2014 to 2015 might have been the year prestige horror put on its spooky little boots. So, pour some tea, lock the basement, and whatever you do, don't let him in.
Okay, listeners, if it's in a word or in a look, this is the Babadook, or How I Became a Fabulous Gay Icon.
I like it when movies have two titles.
Where'd you get this?
On the shelf.
If it's in a word or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. A rumbling sound, then 3 sharp knocks.
Babadook, dook, dook.
That's when you'll know he's around. You'll see him if you look. Nothing bad's gonna happen, Sam.
Did you think that about my dad before he died?
He sees things as they are, that one.
I promised to protect you if you promised to protect me.
Oh my God. Did he hurt anyone?
The boy has significant behavioural problems.
This monster thing has got to stop, all right?
It's just a book. It can't hurt you.
You alright?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
You don't have to be fine, you know.
Just a bit stressed at the moment.
All children see monsters.
Not like this.
I want to report someone stalking me and my child.
You can't get rid of the Babadook.
You can bring me the boy. You can bring me the boy. You can bring me the boy.
What do you want? You're trespassing in my house!
I'm sick, Sam. I need help.
It isn't real. It isn't real. It isn't real.
There once was a widow, quiet and pale, who lived with her son, who who screamed without fail. A knock at the door, a book on the floor, and grief came knocking forevermore. In a grayscale suburbia, Amelia, played by Essie Davis, a shell of a woman held together by grief, denial, and weak tea, is barely surviving life as a single mother. Her husband died in a car crash while driving her to the hospital to give birth to their son, Samuel, played by Noah Wiseman. Samuel, bless his feral little heart, is a walking sugar-fueled cry for help. He builds homemade weapons, screams like an Australian kettle every time someone breathes wrong, and lives in a constant state of fight or flight, mostly fight. Amelia, meanwhile, is drowning in sleep deprivation, stress, and a haunting sense of, I never signed up for this. Her coworkers avoid her, her sister hates her, and her house looks like it was furnished by the emotion resentment. One night, a mysterious red-covered pop-up book titled Mr. Babadook, a sort of Edward Gorey meets Satan situation, is found on Samuel's shelf with no explanation, and he asks his mother to read it for him for his nightly needy time. The book itself is unsettling in a charming, what if grief was a puppet show kind of way. It tells the tale of a shadowy, top-hatted entity called the Babadook. If it's in a word, or it's in a look, you can't get rid of the Babadook. Samuel immediately spirals into full-blown terror. Amelia, in turn, tries to destroy the book, but like any decent metaphor for mental illness, it just keeps coming back. Every time she tears it up or throws it out, the book reappears, sassier than ever, with new pages that depict increasingly violent outcomes for her and her son. Amelia starts to lose it. She talks to herself, finds broken glass in her soup, and sees bug-infested holes in her walls. Just behind the yellow wallpaper, she can't sleep, and she's haunted by visions of the Babadook. The Babadook, meanwhile, begins haunting the house like some kind of Victorian drag queen. He's not subtle. He creaks. He groans. He stretches out of ceilings. He opens doors with gusto. And when he finally shows his face, pale, long-fingered, and floating, you realize something. This thing isn't here to hurt Amelia. It's here to feed off her. To become her. Amelia fully unhinges. She screams at Samuel. She cuts the phone line. She kills the family dog. Rip Bugsy. She starts floating around the house like a demon Roomba. Samuel, in a rare moment of clarity between tantrums, home alones his possessed mother with traps and darts, managing to subdue her long enough for the power of maternal love to kick in. After Amelia comes to and scores a moment of clarity, she and her son begin to realize that you can't kill the Babadook. You can't vanquish him with love or burn him with holy water. You feed him. You acknowledge him. You do what every therapist has ever said about childhood trauma. You make space for it in the basement and set boundaries. So Amelia locks eyes with this shrieking, snarling metaphor for her grief and loss and says, no! She tells it it's not welcome to control her anymore. She reclaims her mind, not by eliminating her pain, but by recognizing it, taming it. She stores it in the basement where she occasionally brings it worms to eat. Literal worms, we're not decoding that. Ultimately, Amelia and Samuel begin to heal and medicate.
The end. Actually, I can decode it right now. I can Dakota Fanning that right now.
I am going to Elle Fanning it.
Yeah, I'm what is it? I'm sad. I'm going to go eat worms. Yeah, that whole thing.
Is it a thing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've never heard this.
Yeah, I'm going to go eat worms. It's a whole saying.
Oh my God, I've learned something.
Yeah, it's when you're needing to spank your inner moppet, you might say something like that. So yeah, it's all part of the goddamn metaphor.
I would assume that I'm going to go eat worms would be like some sort of euphemism for death.
Oh,
like
no. So worms eat you when you're dead.
Oh, you're right.
Silly.
The worms crawl in. The worms crawl out.
The Babadook's global premiere was in January 2014 at the Sundance Film Festival. Fancy. The film then received a limited theatrical release in Australia in May 2014. The US release was very limited. It opened Thanksgiving weekend in just 3 theaters and brought in $30,000, securing the number 44 spot at the box office. The coveted number 44 spot. At its widest, the film played on 80 screens and failed to ever place higher than 33rd. The Babadook failed to become a commercial success in Australia as well, but worldwide would ultimately gross a little more than $10 million against a budget of $2 million. Thanks to streaming services and word of mouth, the film would go on to be a popular cult film.
The Babadook has a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes and is certified fresh. The audience score sits at 72%. The site's consensus reads, The Babadook relies on real horror rather than cheap jump scares and boasts a heartfelt, genuinely moving story to boot. As of 2024, Rotten Tomatoes ranks The Babadook the 21st best horror film of all time.
Wow.
Yeah, high praise.
Glenn Kenny, writing for RogerEbert.com, called the film, quote, the finest and most genuinely provocative horror movie to emerge in this still very new century. Dan Schindel from Movie Mezzanine said that, quote, the Babadook is the best genre creature creation since the big black wolf dog aliens from Attack the Block. High praise. In The Guardian, Peter Bradshaw described the film as a Freudian thriller, giving it 4 out of 5 stars and praised the performances, themes, and Kent's direction. Bradshaw said that, quote, Kent exerts a masterly control over this tense situation, and the sound design is terrifically good, creating a haunted, insidiously whispery intimacy that never relies on sudden volume hikes for the scares, except for that stupid little fucking dragon dinosaur sound.
You mean that boy?
Oh, that too.
This movie is kind of Freudian, though. I mean, there's lots of things about repression going on in this. It does have some accolades, though. At the Saturn Awards, it was nominated for Best Horror Film, but it lost to Dracula Untold. Yeah. It was nominated for Best Actress, but it lost to Rosamund Pike for her role in Gone Girl.
Fair enough.
Yep. And it was also nominated for Best Performance by a Younger Actor.
Fine. Fangoria Chainsaw Awards, it won Best Limited Release, Best Screenplay, Best Actress, and Best Supporting Actor. Wow, Fangoria loved this movie.
Really cleaned up there. Well, the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards are voted by its readers or anybody. Yeah. But it is good to mention that Essie Davis was nominated for at least 15 Best Actress Awards for her role as Amelia, winning 3 of them at the Puchon International Fantastic Film Festival, the Zeitgeist Film Festival, and Toronto After Dark Film Festival.
I never know how to say that.
Yeah, I say it differently every time I read it.
Toronto?
Mm-hmm. Toronto?
Sick as. Sitches. The cast here, obviously, led by Essie Davis, is amazing, right? She does an amazing job. I don't really know her from much. She's been in a bunch. She's been in popular movies, but she's always in kind of bit parts. Although she is coming up in Alien Earth. It's coming out in, I think, August.
I had no idea that she was in that.
Yeah.
I think that bit parts or not, like I really didn't know who Essie Davis was until I watched this movie, and she still wasn't like her name wasn't like on the tip of my tongue after this either. But I thought that she was excellent. I think that every time that I watch this movie, this is like the 3rd time I've rewatched this, and every time I do, I just am reminded at how just fucking good she is in this movie.
She walks so that Toni Collette could run with her trauma.
Are they both Australian too, or Toni Collette, you're like British?
I think so.
So, I mean, come on now.
Yeah.
Academy.
We also have Noah Wiseman, who I think did a couple other things, but pretty much retired and moved on, like a lot of children actors do. We also have Hayley McClinney as Claire, who plays the sister.
The bitch sister.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel Henshaw as Robbie, who's her coworker, and Barbara West as elderly neighbor Gracie Roach,
who I think also does a really good job in this movie.
And I've seen her around before too, and I really like her.
I think she's really good. She plays like a glimmer of hope in this movie, like not just for us, the audience, but I think for a lot of the characters in this.
She does. She has like this. I think she is the catalyst for the movie to kind of turn around.
Yeah.
Right, because she comes to the door and she's just like, "Hey, I know that you're going through a tough time. I'm not here to like fix anything for you, but I just wanted you to know that I'm here if you need me, and I love you, and you are loved." And that's a huge. I don't think it fixes anything, but I think it starts it to be possible for her to start fixing things in this movie, and I think that's great.
Well, I mean, everyone needs like a sort of come to Jesus moment to say, like, pull yourself together in some kind of way.
Well, it's easy for your entire world just to become your problems and your trauma. And they're just in that house, in that grayscale house, with the yellow wallpaper. Yeah. So obviously this is a movie that has a lot of legacy, right? And so we need to dig into the dark, stylish crawl space of the Babadook's background, production, and legacy, and how it fits into the evolution of modern horror. We're going to span the film's origin, its thematic fingerprints, and its place in the birth of prestige horror or elevated horror, depending on how snobby or ironic you want to get.
Well, what do you say?
I think I'd say prestige.
I like prestige. Yeah.
Either way, I think it's just horror now. I think it's like changed enough, It's so mainstream now.
Oh, for sure. And we will for sure get into that.
I feel like it's the two P's, popcorn and prestige. And now we're starting to see a melding, with things like Talk to Me.
Yeah, well, things like anything now that really comes out, everything seems to have like a level of prestige to it.
It has to have some sort of metaphor about it.
Yeah, there has to be a reason.
13 reasons.
Just found my 13th reason.
God damn it. So let's talk about director-writer Jennifer Kent, who is also obviously Australian. The Babadook was Kent's debut feature film. This is, of course, expanded from her short, the 2005 film Monster, which shares a similar premise, like a mother tormented by a shadowy entity. And Kent wrote, directed, and fought tooth and nail to retain any kind of creative control when this thing was paid for. So she began writing this screenplay in 2009, intending to explore parenting, grief, the fear of madness itself. She said that she sought to tell a story about facing up to the darkness within ourselves, the fear of going mad, and an exploration of parenting from a real perspective. And regarding that parenting, she further explained in October 2014 in an interview that, quote, "Now, I'm not saying we all want to go and kill our kids, but a lot of women struggle. And it's a very taboo subject to say that motherhood is anything but a perfect experience for women."
It is super taboo, and like it's not something that's discussed a lot, like she said. I think that there's so much pressure on women whenever they're pregnant to
not only to want kids, but then to
say how magical the experience is.
It's so taken for granted that it's the best experience of their lives or something, and it's just such a shitty thing.
And it creates this unrealistic expectation for them and what they're supposed to experience, and then not even that, but like the postpartum things that come after giving birth, right? I mean, this is something that we don't even get to see that often in horror movies, I think, but a lot more now.
And this didn't just spark an idea for her, right? She really wanted to be laser focused on this idea of like trauma and grief, right? So she wanted this to be inspired by grief and not gore. So she was adamant about making a film about grief, not just using it as window dressing, as something that maybe inspired her to make a whole horror movie, right? She really wanted it to be about something and to really inspire a certain feeling. And she famously said that she wasn't interested in horror for horror's sake. The Babadook is grief, depression, unprocessed trauma, and a coat and a top hat.
And I think it's good. I think it's really good when writer-directors, go into something and they say, like, this is what it's about, or they have an idea of that. I really dig a metaphor. I didn't study literature for nothing.
Yeah.
But, like, I think that the best stories are really saying something sort of under its surface. And like we've said so many times, like horror is the best way to do that, that you can reach so many people and get your message across. And I think that people don't always like fully realize in the moment that they're like taking that message in.
The movie was ultimately made for about $1.6 million. The film's production was modest, and they used practical effects and stop-motion animation for the Babadook itself, reinforcing a sense of the uncanny. Much of the crew came from indie drama backgrounds, not horror, which gave the film its unique tone, of course.
I think that Kent herself has worked on shootings for Lars von Trier and stuff like that. Sure. So she really got to see like indie filmmaking at its finest.
Yeah. This was shot on location in Adelaide, South Australia, and the film has a contained, almost stage production feel because the house is actually built on a soundstage. So this let them control every visual detail, at least inside the house, from like the washed out palette to the weird, unplaceable time period. Like they had vintage TVs and no cell phones, but like, other things just felt, like modern cars. So it's just kind of, I love that timeless quality, and I feel like maybe it followed this vein as well.
Well, I think, and it's good to do that too. Just like it follows says, you can't really place like when it is.
Yeah. Because now like someone answers some sort of like phone that's anything but a smartphone and just dates the film.
Unless you're like clowning a cornfield and you're like, what kind of a phone is this? You know,
I mean, rotary phone though.
Yeah. And so like I think it's important to keep a movie kind of timeless.
But there's like this sad, like, I don't know, collection of films that are using like those Razor flip phones. Like Pulse, I think, is like that, you know?
Really dates it.
So obviously, you know, we've mentioned Essie Davis as a very celebrated actress in this role. She's phenomenal. She happens to be Jennifer Kent's friend from acting school. And her performance is central to the film's tension and trauma, simultaneously sympathetic and terrifying, because she has to carry this whole fucking movie on her shoulders.
She really does. I mean, like, she is in, like, every scene, everything sort of hinges and unhinges on, like, her character. And we've said this before on the podcast, too. I think it's great when directors are working with people that they know really closely and intimately. I think that's why directors choose the same cast all the time.
Yeah.
Because you can get the best kind of performance from them.
When you need an intimate performance, you might as well have a director that you trust and knows what you are good and are bad at. And I think she was challenged by this, but I think she also knew her strengths.
Yeah, I mean, completely. I think that if you're writing something, you might have somebody in mind and you know the best way to like get that performance out of them.
Yeah. And of course, the movie that she had to carry is built on one giant fucking metaphor, right? Which is the Babadook is unprocessed grief. More than a monster, the Babadook is the metaphor that got out of hand. You can't kill it. You only learn to live with it, mirroring how actual grief works in real life. The book says it plainly. The more you deny, the stronger I get. And I love early on, you don't really understand the poetry of it. But when it says, if it's in a word or in a look, I feel like that captures it perfectly. But it's not super evident until you've seen the whole movie, what it's talking about, which is like when you see people that are in grief, you know, or grieving, you could, you know, or still kind of processing something, you can see it in a word or in a look. Yep. Even when something else is going on, or, you know, it could just be on a regular conversation or something, right? It's always in the background, kind of like the Babadook haunting around the corner in the shadows.
So every time I watch the Babadook, you know, the 3 times that I've watched it, I've found that I pick something up along the way, like differently. Like there's something that I've missed, and it usually involves more uncovering of the metaphor. Mm-hmm. And I think you and I both talked about after we watched the movie this time around that we noticed more about the book itself than anything else. And
the throwaway lines like, oh, I used to be a children's author.
Exactly.
You know? Or like she was she wanted to be a children's author, you know, almost like she subconsciously created this thing, you know?
Right. And
which is everything in this movie is intentional up until the very end. Like she's, they're finally outside in the garden. You see color, you see green grass and flowers, but even the rose, you know, is like a black rose, and she is cutting it and tending to it. Right.
And it's growing
she's tending to her garden, dog. You know, yep. Yeah. And of course, then she has to, you know, go downstairs and deal with the Babadook at the end of the movie, because it's just never going to go away, you know. And she feeds it worms
and
from the garden.
And I learned a new phrase. And I mean, you're right. So everything that I picked up this time watching it had to do with this woman's grief, and mostly revolving around that book. And I never heard that throwaway line where she's talking to those women at that birthday party, and she's like, yeah, you know, I wrote a couple children's things, and it fucking like. In my brain while we were watching it, I was like, what did she do? You know, like she doesn't remember creating this book and reading it to her kid. Like she's really trying to like express her grief and something like that. She just chose like the most monstrous way to do it. And I don't know, it just created this whole new level for this movie and its metaphor.
Like the best of other prestige or elevated horror, not all of them, but some of them that are dealing with metaphors, are more reminiscent of almost like a fable, right? Like elevated reality, right? Where that's not really real life. And so it's like, you don't have to get super literal with, oh, she created this, storybook, because it's obvious. It's true. Yes. Everything in this and about this movie and the trauma in it is her creation, or because something she lived through and has to deal with. And so this book is hers and has to be dealt with. Right. And whether she literally sat down and cut it all out and made the pop-up stuff, I don't think that's really what the director's trying to say.
No.
I think what she's saying is like her name is on it, regardless of how it popped up into being. It is a manifestation, either of physical reality, which I don't think so, but it's a manifestation of the metaphor. It's a manifestation of her trauma. It's just another thing that she's being able to physically behold in reality, which is like the Babadook itself. The book might as well be the Babadook.
That's true. And I think
Which it is literally titled, but whatever.
Mr.
Babadook.
One of the things that I love most about this movie is that you don't question the metaphor ever. And it does get to places where it's kind of like beating you about the ear, nose, and throat with it, but it's okay. Like, you don't question the metaphor and you don't question the villain in it. Like, it could very easily just be the metaphor all the way through, or it could easily be an actual monster there. Like, it works on either level.
Well, this is mental illness as a monster.
Yeah.
And a book, really. If it's in a book. It's reading. The film is also an unsettling portrait of mental health struggles and motherhood. Specifically, this is all just wrapped up part of the metaphor, but it's PTSD, insomnia, disassociation, depression. The horror is as much internal as it is supernatural, and I feel like we spend much more time internally than we do supernaturally, even though it may not feel like it. This is also domestic Gothic, right? So Kent updates the Gothic horror tradition where the home becomes a haunted prison.
And that is one of the best things about Gothic horror, like the setting and locations like really become a character within Gothic stories, right?
Yep. The old dark house.
Yeah. Think the old dark house, think like Dracula's castle, think even the juke joint from Sinners. It's a part of the story. And like this house is also it, because it becomes a prison for this family. It completely cuts off the outside world until they have to go and like rejoin it. And even still, after they rejoin the outside world, it's still a prison. It's just a prison for their PTSD and mental illness. And I feel like this movie is not only just about like mental illness and struggles in motherhood, it's also like mental illness and struggles being the children of mothers who are struggling with these things.
Right. Because this kid has no memory of his father or any feeling of association to it at all outside of the relationship he has to his mother and his mother's trauma. And it's, the kid doesn't know really how to articulate it. So in a way, the Babadook is partially his creation too.
Exactly. Well, it becomes something that he is trying to like vanquish to get his mother. This kid is constantly, and for most of the movie, literally crying out, for attention and love and acceptance. And like, you have to try to like stop and think about the actions of the movie from the kid's perspective. And it's hard because this kid is increasingly like annoying and jarring while watching it, but he is literally going through like some of the same things as his mom, and it's really, really sad to think about.
Yeah. So why don't we get on with it and talk about the Babadook as a catalyst of elevated horror?
Yeah, we have to, because this really kicked off a movement that has gained so much steam that it is literally like almost every horror release.
Yeah. So while the Babadook wasn't released by A24, it was distributed by IFC Midnight in the US. It's often grouped with early A24 horror, like 2014 and 2015's The Witch and It Follows and The Invitation, as a turning point in the genre. And so some key traits of this movement from this time are psychological and emotional horror over jump scares, ambiguous or metaphor-driven monsters, artful cinematography, long takes, moody soundscapes, strong social themes, grief, trauma, guilt, repression, less final girl, and more existential spiral.
All the things that I love in a horror movie.
Right. And so it's almost chicken or the egg, which one of these movies can take the crown or the trophy or the responsibility. And I don't think any single one can. But the Babadook is really, really an easy thing. And I think it's been accused of this before, not just by us, although it could be wrong. But right around this time, some sort of culmination of culture, events, what have you, made this kind of rash of critically acclaimable horror movies.
I think this is like part of the reason why things became the norm. Like there's lots and lots of reasons why this happened, right? But people, my 13th reason. I think that people were getting really comfortable talking about mental illness, right? And it became, easier for people to be able to state that sort of thing. And so just like we said many, many times on this podcast, like art will start to imitate life and they'll start to find ways to bring that in. And I think that the Babadook was really, really good at that. When you look at some of these other movies like The Witch, It Follows, The Invitation, these are all very good movies, all movies that we've deep dove into on this podcast already, right? Mm-hmm. But the Babadook really gained a lot of attention and people watched this movie.
And it's more clearly a metaphor than some of those others.
Exactly. And I think that it's just easier for people to say, like, if you're looking for something that is a metaphor, like it is the Babadook.
Yeah. If it's in a name or in a look. So some people are calling this elevated horror, which is a term that some directors, including Kent and Ari Aster, hate because it implies that other horror is lesser, which to us, that feeds the horror ghetto. And so we also hate that, right?
Yeah, I do.
And some people call it art horror, post-horror, or prestige horror, other labels critics have thrown around. But I think prestige horror is something that we generally say.
Yeah, because I think that, it implies elevation, right? It also implies like a really artful creation. And that's not to say that, some B horror is not good or enjoyable, right? But, those movies don't really have a message to it.
But, call it what you want. The Babadook walked so that Midsummer could frolic barefoot through a flower field of trauma.
It did. There would be no Midsummer if they didn't lock that Babadook down in the basement.
Yeah. So the Babadook and its peers proved the horror could be emotionally resonant, visually artful, intellectually rich, and still terrifying.
I think sometimes more terrifying too. Like a jump scare is effective sometimes, but I like creeping dread, and I like when things stick into my brain, my noggin for a long time. That makes it extra scary.
Right. And it revisits like a bad meal. So obviously all of this combined helped to re-legitimize horror in the eyes of critics who had previously dismissed the genre as cheap thrills or even torture porn, which we don't like the term of because it doesn't allow anyone to like it or say they like it, right? We're looking at you Saw 6, but at the same time, I feel like there was a lot of prestige horror or prestigiable horror in the 60s, 70s.
Of course.
And then we kind of got away from that in the 80s and 90s. We did get a little bit of a resurgence with the slasher, mid-90s with Scream, etc. And then we started getting the remakes in the early thousands, and then things kind of circled back to the way things were in the 60s and 70s with metaphor and higher tier storytelling, I think. There we go with the elevated language. Yeah. Again, I have to catch myself.
That's
because
true.
I love popcorn horror. I love stupid movies in general. It's okay. Right. You can have like the Lion in Winter, comedy dialogue without being Dumb and Dumber and one or the other of them being better than the other. You know what I mean? They're two different levels of comedy, just like there's different levels and types of horror.
Well, I think for a long period of time, especially in the 80s, and that's not saying there aren't some prestige horror movies from the 80s.
But they're not Friday the 13th.
No, they're not. I think that people in the 80s and the early 90s, we're just looking at how to make money, like what can we make cheaply, what can we make fast, what's going to have a big return on investment.
Yeah, capitalism capitalized.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we have Scream, right?
Which it still does.
Yeah, it does. The thing is that like these movies are making money now. And I think that Scream plays a part in this too. Yeah, there was a resurgence in like slasher movies right after that. But even Scream has some sort of like prestige elements to it. It's a whole meta thing going on. It's a different way to tell a story.
Yeah.
I think it's an important film.
That's a good point. But this also directly influenced a wave of female-led horror stories dealing with trauma like Relic and St. Maud, The Night House, Run, Rabbit, Run, and solidified the motherhood horror subgenre alongside films like The Others and Rosemary's Baby and later Hereditary. And you'll notice that The Others, of course, came out very early thousands. Rosemary's Baby, of course, was the late 60s, and Hereditary later on we've already mentioned it, right?
Yep.
Toni Collette. Like, I almost feel like this is that movie is almost like the most spiritual successor of this one in a way.
I would completely agree with you. Although I feel like the others in this movie are very similar in like tone and style, kind of.
Well, yeah, it was like A24 before A24 in a way. The others, if it came out today.
It's like the people who created A24 went to the theater and watched the others, and they're like, hey, let's make a company. But yeah, and I feel like I'm always so happy to support female-led horror films, right? I think that it is a largely sort of forgotten voice in horror, and it makes me so happy today that people are like letting women do this. The thing is that they have
usually they're victims, right? Yeah. Horror has always been very, and I would say actually, let's be very specific here, because I feel like horror has always been female focused, just not in the best of ways.
No, in really fucking misogynistic ways.
Yes.
And so when you have these women like creating these terrifying stories that have something to say, and they're really creating really strong female characters like Amelia from this one, and, you know, every person in Relic and the Night House, like I think that these women all have something to say. It's almost always about trauma. But I think that's good. So
yeah, and we still haven't really put that to bed, which I don't know if it needs to be put to bed, but it's almost like that thing like Salem, right? We're like, oh, these poor people, they weren't actually witches, you know. But meanwhile, we have this whole movement where we're celebrating Halloween in Salem, you know, and saying it's okay to be a witch, you know, like, but wait a second, like that's missing the point. And right now we're like, we're kind of glorifying final girls, right? Which is of course the studious virginal archetype of a woman who can survive all of this because she is studious and virginal.
That's right.
Right. And that's not really what we should, that's kind of missing the point, right? We should be kind of moving on to some of these more metaphorical stories that are actually, ironically, a lot closer to the female reality.
Yeah, real life. This is what a real life woman is going through, and the horrors that she experiences on a daily basis. Real life horror.
Now, I don't know that the Babadook was the catalyst for this quote unquote elevated horror movement or prestige horror movement, right? Because all of these kind of came out within a rash of each other, like some sort of tippy top of the bell curve, right? Except that bell curve kept going, right? Yep. And so I don't think there, you know, it's a definitive case, but there are a couple of strong theories that when combined explain why this moment birthed films like The Babadook, It Follows, The Witch, Goodnight Mommy. Here's a breakdown of the most compelling explanations, some from critics, some from directors, and some from meta-industry shifts, right? Okay. Number one being post-2008 recession trauma. Yes, really.
Okay.
So after the 2008 financial crisis, there was a marked rise in anxiety-ridden, socially conscious art across the board. Horror has always reflected cultural fears, and suddenly we had widespread economic insecurity, a growing mental health crisis, a sense that the world was becoming unstable and uncanny. And, you know, The Babadook, which is grief, It Follows, SDIs, the dread of adulthood, The Witch, religious paranoia, Hereditary, familial trauma, all reflect a kind of existential horror rather than a masked slasher or a ghost story. These weren't just scary, they were about something, right? The metaphor.
They were about something. And, you know, under the metaphor is all there in the form of a ghost story or sometimes a slasher, right? They're just like finding a reason or, you know, to have that slasher there, have that ghost there. The ghost is representing something, right? Instead of just being something that's dead.
Looking at you, a ghost story.
Certainly representing something. That movie is a lot. But you're right. I mean, so like post 2008, I remember how people were feeling. Things felt very, very uncertain and very unstable across every walk of life, not just like finances, but like the political landscape was getting more and more toxic and remains that way. We already talked about people being more free to talk about their own mental health issues. And it also became really easy for you to find sort of like help or therapy in ways of like going online, talking on the phone. Like people were able to talk about their own mental health publicly with your friends, it's not only like accepted, but it's expected sometimes if you're going to like trauma bond with someone. And so it only makes sense that art, or especially horror, would sort of follow suit with that, because it just does. Like all throughout time, horror has always taken the collective, fears and consciousness of people and put it into a story.
Or it's a reflection. We've talked about this many times as well.
Yeah.
It's a reflection of like some sort of unconscious collective, of our, it's like just putting a camera on all of our collective nightmares or daydreams.
And that may or may not have been the, intention of the writer or director.
No, it never really is. It's just what are we preoccupied with? People write about what they know, whether they mean to or not. Right. And so also this is the rise of, indie distributing and streaming. So before 2014, indie horror struggled to get wide releases unless it was a gore fest. But thanks to IFC Midnight, A24, Radius, Neon, others, video on demand streaming platforms democratizing access. I remember the first time Netflix ever started their streaming service.
Yep.
Right. And before that, they were mail ordered renting,
which I kind of miss.
Right. And genre festivals like Fantastic Fest, TIFF Midnight Madness, Sundance's Horror Slate gaining influence. It also started a rash of new horror film festivals that things are critically acclaimed now in the horror genre. So The Overlook was born around this time, right? So these films had a new life. They didn't have to hit 2,000 theaters to succeed. They could find their audience online or through word of mouth, especially among millennials hungry for horror that didn't insult their intelligence. And the millennials, like no other generation, had to come up with some sort of trauma like every 4 or 5 years, right? It seemed like, at least every 5 to 10, with we had the 80s savings and loan crisis when we were kids. And then we had the .com bust as we were getting in and out of high school. And then as we were getting into college and joining the workforce, 9/11 happened, and joining and establishing our careers, the Great Recession, and of course, everything that happened since then with COVID, And so it's like these Gen X and millennial filmmakers really had something to talk about. Right. And all these filmmakers not only went through that trauma in their personal lives, but these filmmakers were raised on those like 1960s and 1970s horror movies.
And I think that plays a big part in it too. I mean, like horror has always had its fans, right? And I think that when fans also were able to talk about how much they loved the genre without fear of repercussion or like finger pointing or thinking that they're weird or whatever, they can finally like put their voice inside the art. And I think it's interesting to note that because of some of these directors, you're right, all these film festivals are now saying like they're really promoting their horror slates. Sundance especially is coming in and saying like, here are the After Dark movies that we're showing, And then there's things like The Overlook where it's just all horror or genre type films. And it's just really, really interesting to see like how accepted horror has been, or has become, especially with some of these filmmakers. And you're right. I think that all the 70s movies that they grew up watching, because they're not too far from our ages, really played a part because they're starting to make these more artful kind of movies.
Right. And they grew up on Rosemary's Baby, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, John Carpenter's Halloween, Dario Argento's Suspiria. Right. They weren't making teen slashers. They were reviving horror as art house cinema using mood, metaphor, and dread instead of gore and jump scares.
That's right. And even sometimes they do use gore and whatnot,
That's fine.
But it's like there's some sort of message behind their gore. And I think that...
Yeah, the gore wasn't gore for horror for horror's sake, right?
Right. I mean, and so like I think that you're hard pressed to watch something like Hostel by Eli Roth and not know that he has something to say about that. Yeah, it's incredibly violent, but he's got a very clear message in a post 9/11 world, and he's got a very 70s sensibility whenever he makes movies.
Sure, yeah.
So
there's also trauma as a genre, which is a broader cultural shift. So 2014 to 2015 saw the rise of trauma core storytelling in other genres, not just horror. So like BoJack Horseman, Transparent, The Leftovers, Room, the movie from 2015 with Brie Larson, and Ex Machina, Alex Garland, which is, of course, tech-noir trauma. So audiences and critics started valuing emotional complexity and unreliable narrators. Horror and Horror was uniquely suited to visualize these things literally. Grief, guilt, repression, they all make for great monsters. And this reminds me of us coming out of Sinners. We just talked about this, right? And it's just like, this is why horror is like one of the best genres, if not the best genre, because it can so easily create a very specific feeling and talk about really complex societal issues without, having to spell it out or become a documentary or expose everything in a script. They're able to talk about these things, through metaphor and through fable and story, saying like, oh, change, assimilation, cultural appropriation is our metaphor is vampirism, right? And so it's like you're able to kind of really instantly latch onto these things because they have become stories and metaphors in a way that is more abstract and easily grabbed onto instantly emotionally.
I will always say that horror has a way to really display complex things in a manner that everyone can get. And that's not to say that some people like walk out of the theater knowing exactly what they just watched, but I think like good horror over time will make you think about it, and it'll start to like just really get into your head of what you just saw and how it affects you and how it affects our culture and the things that we're all going through. I do think that trauma has had a lasting impression on 21st century filmmaking, and stories.
Rather
TV
than
shows.
Almost a boredom from peace times and something,
Yeah. I mean,
but around this time, critics, scholars, they all started taking horror seriously again. Major publications started covering horror film festival premieres. Horror was no longer relegated to genre trash and film discourse. A24's rise with like The Witch in 2015, followed by Hereditary in 2018, cemented this new expectation. Horror can be cerebral. It can be slow and savage and Oscar-worthy. Like things like Get Out, The Shape of Water, and Black Swan.
And Toni Collette's performance in Hereditary.
God damn it.
And I think it's important that the critics are saying this because people listen to them so much, especially now. I mean, Rotten Tomatoes is a thing. We talk about it every time we do a deep dive. And if people tell you that something is good and smart, people will believe it, Yeah. And these movies are good and smart, but so many people are saying it. And so like Rotten Tomatoes scores at like 98%, like this movie are just unheard of for horror kind of before this time period.
Yeah. The market craved risk at this point, but only if it looked smart. Only if they could like scapegoat it, right? So studios realized that audiences were burnt out on franchise horror, but still hungry for fear. If you gave them something fresh, cerebral, with a visual identity, they'd show up. Think the Babadook's stark color palette and design. It follows synth-heavy soundtrack and timeless Americana. The Witch's Old English and natural lighting. Hereditary's dollhouse motif. These weren't just horror films. They were mood pieces, and they were marketable because they didn't look like everything else.
No, something different, and people flocked to see them.
There's an alternative bonus theory, the millennial horror renaissance. We already talked a little bit about all the trauma that millennials and Gen Xers had to kind of get through to, live their life. But they also grew up on Scream and Goosebumps and Silent Hill, in addition to all that, global chaos. They're also prone to introspection, therapy speak, and nostalgia, and now making the films they wished existed when they were younger. And perhaps the critical mass of cognitive behavioral therapy, identifying and modifying negative or unwanted thought patterns, right? And so for the first time, this was accessible and mental health was not taboo to talk about. And it was okay to talk about, not only seek therapy, but talk about it, right? Cognitive behavioral therapy, most people think CBT was something that has always been around, but no, it was only invented in the 80s and didn't really get peak widespread usage in therapy and therapeutical settings until around this time, mid to late 2000s and 2010s, right? And so at least to the point where it was like household verbiage, And so I want to say all of this stuff came together where it's like, okay, we can talk about these things. There's a collective idea of what therapy is and what trauma is and what it means in a way that people didn't know how to speak or even think about as in the same way or articulate as much in the times before, right? In the 90s or 80s or 70s or 60s, right? It was all just bad things happening to you or metaphors for motherhood and growing up and things like that, right? But the actual metaphors for trauma in and of itself that was new.
I think one of the number one things that's so different about like this new millennium and people being able to so freely talk about their experiences, their trauma, their introspection, and so on, is social media too. I think that people were given a voice and a platform to say whatever they wanted to without the repercussions of saying it in someone's face. And I think that people got so used to, this sort of like, anonymous posting, even though you're posting with your name to it, that it's now okay just to say some of these things out loud, for better or for worse. Social media has completely changed the way that we think about ourselves and how we talk to people and talk about ourselves. And I think that influenced horror a lot as well. So, but you're right. Like CBT as a theory took a very long time, to sort of like find its way into actual therapy practice. And I think it's just here to stay at this point.
Yeah. And all it is basically talking about your feelings, identifying them, and then making a plan to change the thought pattern.
Yeah. I'm really terrible at all those things.
Yeah, same. So say we all. But, overall, why did so many artful horror films drop around that 2014 to 2015 timeline? So like just to put it all in a nutshell, you could blame the recession, rising anxiety, generation of filmmakers raised on Rosemary's Baby and Donnie Darko and everything in between. Add a pinch of A24's distribution magic and gay semen, and bam! Horror gets a prestige makeover. Suddenly, your trauma didn't need a therapist. It needed a fog machine and a metaphor.
And here we are, Babadook.
We can't talk about the Babadook and not talk about the unexpected queer icon that he has become.
He certainly is quite the queen.
Yeah, so the internet, specifically Tumblr, jokingly labeled the Babadook as gay after a Netflix algorithm reportedly placed it in the LGBTQ category by mistake. So rather than reject the label, the queer community embraced him. Top hat, dramatic flair, living in a closet, it all clicked. He became a Pride Month meme and even made appearances in parades and drag performances. Jennifer Kent's response? Basically, why not?
I fucking loved it when he started like showing up in signs at pride parades and people dressing up like him as this like really unexpected queer icon. It is like taken so much control about the Babadook itself that there's this term called like Baba discourse that talks about like, unexpected queerness and horror, mostly because in this particular movie, he is so disruptive to what is considered to be like a nuclear family.
Is it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
I think it's still grasping at straws, really. But I mean, it's just a joke that went too far. But it speaks to something else that Babadook isn't really the best example of.
Yeah.
But it does speak to all of that.
I think it really speaks to the fact that queer people like horror movies.
Queer trauma.
Yeah, queer trauma is a thing.
Trauma brings personality and experience. And in some ways, queer people, women, people of color, we cultivate personalities while everyone remains beige.
And this is true. Except that our house was like really beige.
We paid for it with our fucking tears.
But just like CBT, was a growing theory, like the idea of queer theory when looking at art and stories and films and literature, like has really gained a life of its own. And I think that people are starting to look at things like the Babadook or even before shit like the yellow wallpaper, like this has Perkins Gilman all over it. So why not find something queer to say about it? And I think that's really interesting as a theoretical movement. So, but we do have some questions to ask about the Babadook, like we do every movie that we deep dive into. The first one, it seems silly to ask, but is the Babadook a horror movie?
Yes.
Like we haven't been saying prestige horror all through this episode. Were you scared while watching the Babadook?
A little bit. I do like the creeping dread.
Yeah, I think that it's a very, very tense movie with an intense performance by Essie Davis. I think that by the end of the movie, like you're sort of like wrapped up in all of her mental illness and where it's going to go. And I think that you actually start to be afraid for the child and everyone around her.
And like, even though I know it's not in this film, I do catch myself looking behind her in the shadows and, thinking I remember things that didn't really happen in this movie, And it's really kind of interesting.
I think mostly because you don't want to imagine like someone talking to their kid this way. You know what I mean? Like you're trying to find an explanation for the horror that's happening. There's just not one. It is her. What did you rate the Babadook out of 5 stars?
I think I gave it a 4-star.
I gave it 4.5. always that half star higher than you somehow. But I think this is a solid movie. Like, it is damn near perfect. I'm fairly certain that if, Letterboxd existed when I watched this for the very first time, I would have given it 5 stars probably. I think the more times that I watch it, you obviously know the metaphor at that point. There's nothing new, really, even though you discover some new things. But I feel like by the end of the movie, it just is not as good as the start of it.
Yeah, I think that it's great all the way through for a first-time watch.
Yeah.
For most of us, I think. And for me, I didn't really enjoy it as much on the second watch because by the end of the film, it really comes full circle on that metaphor and it just kind of clicks. For, I want to say the vast majority of us, right?
Yeah.
And so the second watch is just like, oh, this is where they also fed us, all these little breadcrumbs everywhere that this is what it's talking about, and so that's kind of interesting. But in the meantime, what's going to happen. And it almost isn't worth sitting through all of the fucking screams of that child.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And I'm not trying to be like catty. I'm like, it's literally painful, like sitting through all of this child screaming in this movie. And it's like, I don't want to, I'm going to see this movie like once every 10 years.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important and it's good and it's well acted and I love the atmosphere, but like, they do some intentional things with the sound design of this movie. And it's kind of a wet Grinch salad in a way that some of the other prestige horror isn't.
I mean, some of them are pretty wet Grinch salad.
Well, Hereditary comes to mind.
Yeah.
But I've come to kind of desensitize myself after the first watch and enjoy it on the second and third watch. Mm-hmm. Versus this one is just a slog to get through the screaming.
Yeah,
it's literally just like an annoyance more than it is like I'm feeling traumatized by this wet Grinch salad.
And I think that the kid does a good job. I mean, like, obviously
in this movie, the trauma already happened, right? Versus in Hereditary, you have to live through it too.
It's true. Oh my God, you're right. But yeah, that kid screams. I will do without them, please. But I think it's important to rewatch this movie, like you said, as often as you would choose. But I think that, learning and finding those breadcrumbs along the way become more and more important the more you watch it and get to understand like what leads you to the end, right? Mm-hmm. So finally, who's the hottest guy in the Babadook?
Well, it's got to be Daniel Henschel, her nurse coworker.
Robbie.
Mr. Nurseman?
Nurseman?
Nurseman Daniel? Nurseman Robbie.
Some sort of orderly or something? Do we even use the word orderly anymore?
I don't know. Nurseman?
Nurseman. He was adorable.
Yes.
And super nice. I mean, like, what kind of guy?
Until that goddamn child scared him away.
Oh, yeah. Well, and her lie. I mean, but like, he shows up with flowers for her and a toy for her sick kid who's not sick because she lied to him.
Well, he's sick in the head.
Yeah, and he stayed and worked a whole shift for her.
Yeah.
I was just like, you know what? I would just pinch his cheeks and invite him home. Anyway, do you have some fun facts for me?
Wow. Are you Claire the neighbor? Yeah. Gracie or whatever her name is?
I don't know who you need to hear this or not, but you're loved, Robbie. Do you have some fun facts for me?
The Babadook's design was inspired by Georges Méliès and German Expressionism. So Jennifer Kent wanted the Babadook to look similar to something from early cinema. Think Nosferatu meets A Trip to the Moon. That's why he has a silent film aesthetic, exaggerated features, jittery movements, a penchant for dramatic entrances, the top hat, the black and white motif. Yeah.
And there is even a moment in this movie where there's this whole like silent movie thing. Right?
Yeah, they literally hit that over the head.
Yeah, they do. And he's very silent filmy.
Also, Essie Davis's husband plays the dead husband, Ben Winspear, who plays Amelia's deceased husband in flashbacks and hallucinations, is actually Essie Davis's real life partner, because nothing says romance like filming a ghostly crash scene with your spouse.
Yeah, how do you like go home and talk about that after the end of the day or whatever? He was really hot too, though.
Maybe talk about how much you're getting paid.
How much did you get paid for today's car crash scene?
I don't know. You weren't in that stupid fucking scene with this child screaming at me.
How was your day, honey? I need you to be quiet for the rest of the night.
The Babadook book was handmade, so the infamous pop-up book was built entirely by hand. No CGI, no animation shortcuts. Only one full version existed during production, and it was operated on set using fishing wire and hidden hands. It later sold out instantly when replicas were released to fans.
I remember when this happened, and by the time I found out that you could get it, it was gone. I was like, well, God damn it.
No jump scares were allowed. Jennifer Kent specifically avoided jump scares, even removing a few that tested well. She wanted the horror to feel inescapable and suffocating, like a panic attack, not a haunted house ride.
I mean, it does. It does feel suffocating in this movie. And I think it's great to not have jump scares or things like that. Like a Dolby shock, like I said earlier, can be effective and it has a place in horror, but like this movie doesn't need that to get its message across.
Also, that screaming, mostly real. Ugh. No, Wiseman's ear-splitting screams weren't dubbed in later. They were captured live on set and deliberately unsoftened in post. So Kent wanted the audience to feel just as worn down as Amelia. And boy, howdy, did I.
Fucking succeeded, Jennifer Kent. This is why they had so much tea on set too, because that boy probably screamed himself fucking hoarse. She's like, take 70. And then Essie Davis is like, okay, I'm really spiraling.
Yeah. For my last fun fact, you can own the Babadook's book if you're brave enough. So after a constant fan demand, a limited run of 1,000 hand-numbered signed copies of Mr. Babadook were released, as we mentioned, complete with the pop-ups and creepy rhymes. And proceeds for that went to support children's charities. And you might be able to pick one of these up on eBay, or at least one seller on Etsy is selling high-quality replicas.
Oh.
And I just bought it.
Oh.
The last one. For the Film Flamers.
For the Nook?
For the Nook.
If it's in a look, or it's in a Nook.
It's a book, and it has a look. It's in the Nook.
Oh my God. We have gone Susian. I cannot wait to look at this, though. I'm so excited. I really wanted those.
I can't wait.
Thank God. Thank you, Etsy. Another good 21st century invention. I think that just about wraps up our conversation on the Babadook. As always, we want to know what you think about this movie, our conversation about it, and maybe what you feel about prestige horror. Find us on social media at The Film Flamers on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, all the places.
You can email us at tiredqueens@filmflamers.com or call our hotline at
972-666-7733.
Oh, call our hotline and we'll baba your duck.
Flick my baba bean.
He said, his mouth still wet with clam juice.
God, that's our new favorite.
The shadow people will reclaim this land.
Our new favorite phrase. Mouth still wet with clam juice.
Give me their thumbs.
We have some more non-A24 prestige horror to talk about this month on our next episode. Join us as we do a deep dive into the female-directed Relic.
That's right. Really fits perfectly into this one.
It really does. I feel like it's also Australian.
Multi-generational motherhood and trauma.
And a haunted house metaphor.
Yes.
Love it. Also, if you can't get enough of the Film Flamers, and we know that you can't, head over to patreon.com/thefilmflamers, where we have a poll where you can help choose this month's non-A24 prestige horror film. We have a whole list of things for you to choose from. Not only that, you can get all of our previous bonus episodes and join the family over there. There's a very active chat where our Patreon family members are talking to each other, getting everyone's ideas about what they're watching, and it's just really a joy to see.
Well, Robin?
Yes, Chris?
I need to go check that Patreon chat and then get some
sweet dreams. I really thought you were going to say something about mental health. I don't know why. I thought that was going to be the follow-up.
No, I've given up on that.
I get some mental health.
I take pills now.
I'm giving up on that. I
need to go adjust my Zoloft and get some trauma core.
Oh my god. Is trauma porn a thing?
Man, Babadook's being a dildo.
I know a certain Babadookie who's sleeping with mommy tonight.